The morning air was cold and still outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists packed the iron gates, cameras raised, waiting for the changing of the guard. Among them stood a man in his late 20s, loud and restless. His name was Derek, and he had traveled from Australia with one goal in mind: to get the perfect video for his social media page. He wasn't interested in history. He wasn't there to admire tradition. He wanted clicks. He wanted reactions, and he was willing to do anything to get them. Derek pushed through the crowd, elbowing past families and elderly couples. His phone was already recording. He grinned at the camera, his voice booming over the murmur of the crowd. "All right, mates. Let's see if we can get one of these toy soldiers to crack." People around him shifted uncomfortably. A mother pulled her child closer, but Derek didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. The guards stood in perfect formation. Red uniforms pressed, tall bearskin hats casting shadows over their faces. They didn't blink. They didn't flinch. They were statues carved from discipline and duty. Derek stepped closer to the gate, then closer still. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. He raised his phone higher, zooming in on one of the guards. The young soldier stood at attention, rifle at his side, eyes forward. His jaw was tight, his breathing steady. But Derek saw something else. He saw a target. "Hoy, mate!" Derek shouted. "Can you hear me in there? Or is that hat too heavy?" A few tourists chuckled nervously. Others looked away. The guard didn't move. Derek wasn't done. He stepped even closer, now just a few feet from the gate. His voice grew louder, sharper. "What's the matter? Too scared to talk? Or maybe you're just a robot. Yeah." Still nothing. Derek's grin widened. He turned the camera toward himself, speaking directly to his future audience. "Look at this guy. Paid to stand there like a mannequin. What a joke." Then he did something no one expected. He reached through the bars of the gate and waved his hand in front of the guard's face. The crowd gasped. A security officer nearby started moving forward, but he was too far away. Derek laughed, pulling his hand back. "See? Told you? Not even human." For a moment, everything seemed frozen. The tourists held their breath. The other guards remained still. Even the wind seemed to pause. But then, the young guard moved. Not a flinch. Not a twitch. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, until his eyes locked onto Derek's. The air changed. The laughter died. Even Derek's smile faded. The guard's voice was low, calm. "Duh." But it carried across the courtyard like a crack of thunder. "Step back from the gate." Derek blinked, caught off guard. For the first time that morning, he didn't know what to say. The guard took one step forward. His boots struck the pavement with a sharp, echoing thud. "I said, step back." Derek's phone was still recording. His hand trembled slightly, but he tried to recover, forcing a nervous laugh. "Relax, mate. I'm just having a bit of fun." The guard didn't smile. He didn't blink. "This is your final warning." The crowd had gone completely silent. Every eye was on the two men. The tension was thick enough to taste. Derek opened his mouth to say something else. Something clever, something that would save face. But before he could speak, the guard did something that no one saw coming. The guard reached down and unclipped a small radio from his belt. His eyes never left Derek's face. "Control, this is Sentry 3. We have a situation at the main gate. Requesting backup and police presence." Derek's expression shifted. The smirk was gone. His face went pale. Wait, hold on," he stammered, stepping back. "I was just joking around, man. No need to call anyone." The guard clipped the radio back onto his belt. He didn't respond. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. Within seconds, 2 more guards appeared from the side entrance. Their movements were sharp, synchronized. Behind them came a Metropolitan Police officer, her hand resting on her belt, her expression serious. Derek's heart pounded. He could feel the eyes of hundreds of tourists burning into him. His phone was still recording, but now it felt like evidence instead of entertainment. The police officer approached the gate. She looked at Derek, then at the guard. What happened here? The guard's voice was steady, professional. This individual made physical contact with palace property and refused to comply with multiple warnings to step back. Derek's mouth fell open. Physical contact? I barely touched the gate. The officer turned to him, her gaze cold. Sir, you need to come with me. For what? I didn't do anything wrong. You crossed a security barrier and interfered with a member of the King's Guard. That's a criminal offense, the crowd murmured. Phones were out now, dozens of them, all recording. Derek could see his viral moments slipping away. It's turning into something much worse. He tried to laugh it off, looking around at the crowd as if they were on his side. Come on, guys. This is ridiculous, right? I was just having a laugh. No one laughed with him. A few people shook their heads. One man muttered, "Idiot." The officer stepped closer. Sir, you can either come voluntarily, or I'll place you under arrest. Your choice. Derek's jaw tightened. His pride battled with his common sense. Finally, he lowered his phone and stuffed it into his pocket. Fine, whatever. As the officer led him away, Derek shot one last look at the guard. The young soldier stood exactly where he had been, expression unchanged, posture perfect. But just before Derek turned the corner, the guard spoke again. His voice was quieter this time, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Respect isn't optional here. It's earned, and you just lost yours. Derek said nothing. He followed the officer toward the police vehicle parked near the palace entrance. His head down, his confidence shattered. The crowd began to disperse, whispering among themselves. Some replayed the videos they had captured. Others simply shook their heads and moved on. But one person stayed behind. An elderly man, dressed in a worn jacket and a veteran's cap, stood near the gate. He had watched the entire scene unfold. His eyes were misty, his expression thoughtful. He approached the guard slowly, respectfully. The young soldier noticed him and gave a small nod. Excuse me, son, the man said, his voice soft but steady. I just wanted to say thank you. The guard blinked, surprised. Sir, for what you did? For standing your ground? The man's hand trembled slightly as he gestured toward the now empty spot where Derek had stood. People like him don't understand what that uniform means. But I do. The guard's expression softened, just a fraction. Were you in service, sir? The old man nodded. Royal Marines. 40 years ago. Different time. Different wars. But the same pride. He reached out and offered his hand. The guard hesitated for only a moment before shaking it firmly. It's an honor, sir. The old man smiled. No, son. The honor is mine. He stepped back, gave a small salute, and walked away. The guard returned to his position, his face once again unreadable. But inside, something had shifted. The weight of the moment settled over him, not as a burden, but as a reminder. He wasn't just standing outside a palace. He was standing for something bigger, and that was worth protecting. Hours later, Derek sat in a small, sterile room at the police station. The walls were gray. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. His phone had been confiscated, along with his wallet and keys. He slouched in the metal chair, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. But his leg bounced under the table. His mind raced. A police officer entered the room holding a clipboard. She sat down across from him, her expression neutral. Derek Harrison. Australian citizen? Here on a tourist visa? Derek nodded, saying nothing. You're being charged with disorderly conduct and interference with a protected landmark. Do you understand the seriousness of this? Derek scoffed. It's not that serious. I barely touched the gate. The officer raised an eyebrow. You physically reached through a security barrier at one of the most protected sites in the country. After being warned, on camera, Derek shifted in his seat. It was a joke. Was it funny? He didn't answer. The officer leaned forward, her tone sharpening. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Harrison. Those guards aren't actors. They aren't props for your social media. They're active soldiers. Some of them have served in combat zones, Afghanistan, Iraq. They've seen things you couldn't imagine. And they stand there every day representing something bigger than themselves. Derek looked down at the table. You disrespected that. You disrespected them. And in this country, that has consequences. Silence filled the room. The officer stood. You'll be processed and released on bail. Your court date will be scheduled within the next 2 weeks. If you're found guilty, you could face a fine, community service, or deportation. Derek's head snapped up. Deportation. That's up to the judge. She opened the door. Someone will be in shortly to finish your paperwork. She left. Derek sat alone, staring at the scratched surface of the table. For the first time that day, he felt something close to regret. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, the young guard's shift had ended. His name was Corporal James Thornton, and he had served in the British Army for 6 years. He had been deployed twice, seen combat, lost friends, but today had been different. Today, he had gone viral. James didn't know it yet. He had left his phone in his locker, as required during duty. But the videos were spreading, fast. Tourists who had witnessed the confrontation uploaded their footage to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. The clips were short, shaky, but powerful. One angle showed Derek waving his hand through the gate. Another captured the guard's piercing stare. The clearest video caught the moment James spoke, his voice cutting through the crowd like a command from a different era. Step back from the gate. The internet loved it. Comments flooded in by the thousands. Is what respect looks like. That guard didn't. Flinch legend. People forget these are real soldiers. Derek got what he deserved within 12 hours. The story had been picked up by major news outlets. BBC, The Guardian, even international channels. The headline was always the same. Royal Guard's powerful response to disrespectful tourists goes viral. James learned about it the next morning. His phone exploded with notifications the moment he turned it on. Messages from friends. Tags from strangers. Links to articles with his face on them. He sat on the edge of his bunk, scrolling in disbelief. One of his fellow soldiers, a corporal named Ahmed, leaned over his shoulder. Wait, you're famous? James shook his head. I was just doing my job. Yeah, but people needed to see it. Ahmed clapped him on the back. You reminded them what we stand for. James didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. He felt the weight of the uniform, the responsibility it carried. But he also felt something else, pride. Not in the attention, not in the videos, but in the moment itself. In standing firm when it mattered. Later that afternoon, James received a message from his commanding officer. He was to report to the main office immediately. His stomach tightened. Was he in trouble? Had he overstepped? He walked across the barracks, his mind spinning. When he reached the office, he knocked twice. Enter. Inside, his commanding officer, Major Calloway, sat behind a large wooden desk, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a man in a dark suit, mid-50s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. James saluted. Sir, Major Calloway nodded. At ease, Corporal. James relaxed, but only slightly. The man in the suit stepped forward, extending his hand. Corporal Thornton, my name is Richard Hastings. I work in communications for the Ministry of Defense. James shook his hand, confused. Sir Hastings smiled. You've made quite an impression, Corporal, and we'd like to talk to you about it. James stood frozen, unsure what to say. Major Calloway gestured toward a chair. Sit down, Corporal. This isn't a disciplinary meeting. James sat, his posture still rigid. Hastings took the seat across from him, folding his hands on the table. Let me get straight to the point, Hastings began. What happened yesterday has captured the attention of millions of people. The video has been viewed over 20 million times. News outlets around the world are covering it. And the public response has been overwhelmingly positive. James blinked. 20 million. Hastings nodded. People are calling you a symbol of dignity, discipline, and respect. In a time when those values feel rare, you reminded the world what they look like. Major Calloway leaned forward. The ministry wants to use this moment, Corporal, not to exploit you, but to highlight the work of the King's Guard and the broader military. We're considering a series of interviews, appearances, possibly even a short documentary. James felt his chest tighten. Sir, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. I'm just a soldier. Exactly, Hastings said. That's why people are listening. You weren't trying to be a hero. You were simply doing your duty. And that's the message we want to share. James looked down at his hands. He thought about the moment at the gate, the look in Derek's eyes, the silence of the crowd. He hadn't been thinking about cameras or attention. He had just wanted to protect the honor of the post. What would I have to do? He asked quietly. Hastings pulled a folder from his briefcase. Nothing invasive. A few interviews with reputable outlets. Maybe a public statement. We'd work with you every step of the way. And it's entirely your choice. James hesitated. Can I think about it? Of course. Hastings stood, offering his hand again. Take your time. But know this, Corporal. What you did mattered, and the world is better for seeing it. After Hastings left, Major Calloway stayed behind. He poured 2 cups of tea and slid one across the desk to James. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, he said, his voice softer now. But I'll tell you what I think. James looked up. I think moments like this are rare. And when they happen, they remind people why we do what we do. Not for the glory. Not for the recognition. But because someone has to stand for something. James took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in his chest. Did I handle it right, sir? Calloway smiled. You handled it perfectly. That evening, James called his mother. She lived in a small town in Yorkshire, where she had raised him alone after his father passed away when James was 12. She answered on the second ring. Jamie, is that you? Hi, Mum. Oh my God, Jamie. I saw the video. Everyone's been sending it to me. Are you all right? James laughed softly. I'm fine, Mom. It's just been a bit mad. A bit mad. You're all over the news. Mrs. Henderson from next door came over just to show me the article in the paper. She said you made her cry. I didn't mean to know, love. Good tears. Proud tears. Her voice cracked slightly. Your dad would have been so proud. James closed his eyes, swallowing hard. You think so? I know so. She paused. Are they treating you well? Are people being kind? Yeah, ma'am. Everyone's been great. They're asking me to do some interviews, maybe talk about it publicly. And what do you want to do? James exhaled slowly. I don't know. Part of me just wants it to go away. But another part of me thinks maybe it's important. Maybe people need to hear it. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Jamie, you've always known what's right. Trust yourself. Whatever you decide, I'll be proud of you. They talked for another 20 minutes about everything and nothing. When they finally hung up, James felt lighter. He sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the evening sky turned deep blue. Somewhere in the city, people were still talking about him, sharing the video, debating what it meant. But in that moment, James wasn't thinking about fame or interviews. He was thinking about the old veteran who had shaken his hand. The man who understood, that was what mattered. The next morning, James met with Hastings again. This time, he was ready. I'll do it, he said. But on one condition. Hastings raised an eyebrow. What's that? I want to talk about more than just me. I want to talk about the other guards. The ones who stand there every day and never get recognized. The ones who've served in harder places than I have. If I'm going to be the face of this, I want to make sure people understand it's bigger than one moment. Hastings smiled. I think that can be arranged. So it began. Over the next week, James gave 3 interviews. One with the BBC, one with a military magazine, and one with a popular podcast that focused on stories of service and sacrifice. In each one, he spoke calmly, humbly. He didn't brag. He didn't exaggerate. He simply told the truth, and people listened. Meanwhile, Derek's life had taken a very different turn. The court date arrived faster than he expected. He stood in front of a judge, dressed in a cheap suit he had borrowed from a hostel mate. His lawyer, a young public defender, had advised him to plead guilty and show remorse. Derek had refused at first. "Why should I apologize? I didn't hurt anyone." His lawyer had looked at him with tired eyes. "Because if you don't, they'll throw the book at you. You're a foreign national. You embarrass the country on an international stage. Do you really want to roll those dice?" Derek had stayed silent now. Standing in the courtroom, he realized his lawyer had been right. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and a stern expression, reviewed the case file. She glanced up at Derek, her gaze cold. "Mr. Harrison, you've been charged with disorderly conduct and interference with a protected site. How do you plead?" Derek swallowed. "Guilty, Your Honor," the judge nodded. "Before I pass sentence, I want to say something. What you did was not just foolish. It was disrespectful. The King's Guard represents centuries of tradition, sacrifice, and service. These are soldiers who have put their lives on the line for their country, and you treated them like a joke." Derek's face flushed. He looked down. "However," the judge continued, "I also see that you have no prior criminal record. I believe in the possibility of growth and understanding." She paused, letting the words settle. "You are hereby sentenced to 200 hours of community service to be completed within the next 6 months. Additionally, you will pay a fine of £5,000. And finally, you are required to attend a course on British history and military service." Derek's head snapped up. "A course? Yes, so that you might learn what that uniform truly represents." The judge's expression softened, just slightly. "Consider this an opportunity, Mr. Harrison, not a punishment." The gavel came down. Derek left the courthouse in a daze. 200 hours. £5,000. A history course. His viral moment had turned into a nightmare. But something strange happened over the following weeks. As Derek completed his community service, working in veteran support centers and military charities, he began to meet people, real people, not tourists or influencers, but men and women who had served. One afternoon, he was sorting donated clothing at a charity shop when an older man approached him. He wore a faded navy jacket and had a prosthetic leg. "You're the kid from the video, aren't you?" Derek tensed. "Yeah, that's me." The man studied him for a moment. "You learn anything yet?" Derek hesitated. "I'm trying to." The man nodded slowly. "Good. That's all anyone can ask." He extended his hand. Derek shook it. "His name's Alan. Royal Navy. 30 years. "Derek, I know." Alan smiled faintly. "Look, kid, you made a mistake. A big one. But you're here. That counts for something." Over the next few weeks, Derek found himself talking to Alan more and more. Alan told him stories about serving on aircraft carriers, about losing friends in the Falklands, about what it meant to wear the uniform. Derek listened. For the first time in his life, he understood what he had mocked. He attended the history course as required. First, it felt like another punishment. But as the instructor spoke about the immense battles, the sacrifices, the men and women who had died defending their country, something shifted inside him. He thought about James Thornton, the guard who had stared him down, the man who hadn't shouted or shoved, but had simply stood his ground with dignity. Derek realized he had been jealous. Jealous of that certainty, add purpose. He had spent his whole life chasing attention, desperate to be seen. But James had something deeper, something real. One evening, Derek sat in his hostile room, staring at his phone. The original video was still there, buried in his saved drafts. He had never posted it. He opened it and watched it again. He saw himself waving his hand through the gate, heard his own mocking voice, saw the moment James turned and locked eyes with him. And for the first time, felt ashamed. He deleted the video. Then he opened his social media account. He had thousands of followers, most of whom had been waiting for his epic content from London. He typed out a message. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Then he hit send. "I messed up. I disrespected someone who deserved respect. I was wrong. I'm learning why. If you followed me for drama, you can unfollow now. I'm done chasing clicks." He put the phone down and didn't look at it for the rest of the night. Back at Buckingham Palace, James returned to his post. The attention had died down. The interviews were over. Life returned to normal. But something had changed. Tourists who visited the palace now looked at the guards differently. They kept their distance. They spoke in quieter tones. Some even nodded respectfully as they passed. One morning, a young girl approached the gate. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand. She looked up at James, nervous but determined. "Excuse me, sir." James didn't move, as protocol required. But he glanced down at her. "My dad was a soldier," she said quietly. "He's not here anymore, but I wanted to say thank you for standing there, for being brave." She placed the paper at the base of the gate. It was a drawing, crayon sketch of a guard in a red uniform. Then she stepped back and gave a small, clumsy salute. James felt his throat tightened. He couldn't respond. He couldn't break formation. But inside, something broke open. When James's shift ended, he retrieved the drawing. He held it carefully, as if it were made of glass. Back in the barracks, he pinned it to the wall beside his bunk. Ahmed noticed it immediately. "What's that?" "A reminder," James said quietly. "Of what?" James looked at the crayon soldier, standing tall and proud. "Of why it matters." Weeks turned into months. The viral video became old news. The internet moved on to the next story, the next controversy, the next moment, but the impact remained. Derek completed his community service. On his final day, Alan met him outside the charity shop. "What?" "So what now?" Alan asked. Derek shrugged. "I don't know. Go home, I guess. Figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life." Alan studied him. "You know, there's always room for people who want to serve. Doesn't have to be military. Could be charity work. Could be teaching. Could be anything, really. As long as it's bigger than yourself." Derek nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe." Alan clapped him on the shoulder. "You're all right, kid. You just needed to get knocked down a peg." Derek smiled. "Thanks, Alan." He shook hands one last time. Then Derek walked away, feeling lighter than he had in months, before he left London. Derek did something he never thought he would do. He went back to Buckingham Palace. He stood at the gate. It's just like he had months before. But this time he didn't have his phone out. He didn't try to get close. He simply stood there, watching. The guards were in formation. Tourists snapped photos. Children pointed and whispered. Derek looked at the young soldier standing nearest to him. He didn't know if it was James. The uniforms all looked the same. But it didn't matter. He stayed for 10 minutes. Then he turned and walked away. No videos, no jokes. Just respect. James never saw Derek that day. But he would have recognized him if he had. He thought about him sometimes. Wondered if the man had learned anything. Hoped that he had. One evening, months later, James sat in a quiet pub with Ahmed and a few other soldiers. They were off duty, relaxed, laughing over pints. Ahmed raised his glass. "To James, the most famous guard in British history." James rolled his eyes. "Shut up, I'm serious. You're a legend, mate. I'm really not. You are too. That little girl who brought you the drawing." James paused, his smile fading into something softer. "Yeah, maybe." Ahmed leaned back. "You know what I think? I think moments like that are why we do this. Not for the parades or the tourists, but for the people who get it, the ones who understand." James nodded. "Yeah." They drank in comfortable silence. Outside, the city hummed with life. People rushed past the pub windows, caught up in their own worlds, their own worries. But inside that small corner, a group of soldiers sat together. They had seen things most people couldn't imagine. They had stood in the cold and the rain and the heat. They had protected something bigger than themselves, and in their own quiet way. They were proud. Back in Australia, Derek sat in his small apartment. He had started a new job, working at a community center that supported veterans. The pay wasn't great, but the work felt meaningful. He had deleted most of his social media. He still posted occasionally, but it was different now. No stunts, no mockery. Just honest reflections on life and growth. One evening, he received a message from an unknown account. It was short. "Saw your post about your work with veterans. Respect. Keep it up." Derek stared at the message. He didn't know who sent it, but he didn't need to. He typed a reply. "Thanks. I'm trying." Then he put his phone away and went back to work. Years later, James stood in a different place. He had been promoted. He no longer stood at the palace gates. Instead, he trained new recruits, teaching them discipline, honor, and the weight of the uniform. One afternoon, a young soldier approached him after training. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That video. The one from a few years ago? Is it true? Did that really happen?" James smiled. "Yeah, it did. What was going through your mind?" James thought for a moment. "I was just doing my job. But I was also thinking about everyone who wore this uniform before me. Everyone who stood where I stood. I didn't want to let them down." The young soldier nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Will I ever have a moment like that, sir?" James put a hand on his shoulder. "You already are. Every time you put on that uniform, every time you stand your ground, every time you choose honor over ease, that's your moment." The young soldier stood a little taller. James watched him walk away, feeling a deep sense of calm. He thought about the drawing still pinned to his wall at home. The little girl's clumsy salute, the old veteran's handshake. The moment that changed everything. He realized something then. It wasn't about the video. It wasn't about going viral or being famous. It was about standing for something. Even when no one was watching. Even when it was hard, that was what mattered. And as the sun set over the barracks, casting long shadows across the parade ground, James Thornton stood a little, straighter, not because the world was watching, but because he knew who he was. And that was enough.